UFC 293, Adesanya versus Strickland. The UFC heads to Sydney, Australia this weekend for what should be a pretty electric cards. A lot of light heavyweights and heavyweights being featured more than usual, so that should be pretty exciting. And of course, we have Israel Adesanya capping it all off, defending his title. Feels like he just fought a few weeks ago, so you got to appreciate the activity out of him. But today I'm going to go through all the fights on the card. Yes, every single fight. I'm going to give you my picks and predictions. We are riding a 9-week, I guess maybe not 9-week, but a 9-win streak of picking the main event fight correct. 9 in a row. Let's make it 10, boys. Without further ado, let's start off with some welterweights. We have Kevin Jousset taking on Kiefer Crosbie. These are two guys both making their debut in the UFC. Jousset is riding a 3-fight win streak, while Kiefer is on a 2-fight losing streak. Kiefer, he had a few fights in Bellator, so he has been going up against some better competition, you could argue. Jousset, on the other hand, he's had a great deal of success, and he is a Australia product, or I think actually a New Zealand product by way of France. Just doing a little bit of film study on these two guys. I saw Jousset looking a bit tentative in some of his recent fights, and you don't really like to see that. I think I'm going to take Crosbie by decision in this one, just due to that tentativeness I've seen out of Jousset in the past, but this one's really a toss-up, so I'm probably fading. Next up is Shane Jung taking on Gabriel Miranda in the featherweight division. Shane Jung is the slight favorite in this one. He's 3-2 in his last 5 fights. Gabriel Miranda is 0-1 in the UFC, with, I believe, his one loss being to Saint Denis, a guy, Benoit Saint Denis, who has been making a lot of noise in the lightweight division, so he's going to be moving down in this one. Shane Jung missed weight brutally today, which you don't like to see. I mean, he missed it by 3-4 pounds. That tells me that he's not that locked in. We've already seen the line shift a bit in Gabriel Miranda's favor. Shane Jung's on a 3-fight losing streak. On top of that, I think any chance to get plus money against Shane Jung, especially with a guy like Gabriel Miranda, who he showed some promise against a really good fighter in Benoit Saint Denis. I'm going to take Miranda by decision in this one. Next is Charlie Radke taking on Blood Diamond. Charlie Radke is the massive favorite in this one, of course, because people have seen Blood Diamond in the UFC 2 fights in a row now just get absolutely mauled and show little to no grappling ability whatsoever. It's really been just a tough thing to watch, a bad experience. But screw it, we're riding Blood Diamond in this one. Charlie Radke, he's got a little bit of wrestling ability. He's taken a few guys' backs in the fights that I watched, but I think he's the worst opponent for Blood Diamond yet. We're getting just ridiculous odds out of him. I think I'm going to take Blood Diamond by decision in this one. Hopefully he's learned how to defend at least a takedown a little bit, to the point where he can keep it standing enough to score a little bit and win a decision here. Next up is Nasrat Haqparast. He's taking on Landon Quinones. Nasrat is the massive favorite at 3-2, at minus 470. He's 3-2 in his last 5 fights. Landon Quinones is 7-1 overall, but he also has a loss in the Ultimate Fighter that's not counted on his official record. And this is just a tough one if you're Landon Quinones. He's taken on a super experienced guy who's 3-2 in his last 5 fights. Landon Quinones got tapped out by Jason Knight, who I think is a lot worse than Haqparast. And you just can't really trust these guys with so little UFC experience. I think this is a tough fight for him. Definitely could surprise some people. I mean, had a lot of success, but I just don't really see it happening here. I think Nasrat gets the decision win. Next up is a lightweight fight between Jamie Mullarkey and John Makdessi. Jamie Mullarkey is the favorite at minus 260 or so. He's 3-2 in his last 5 fights. John Makdessi is at plus 210 here. Makdessi is 38, and he's just not very active. He's been averaging about a fight a year for the last 5 years. Not horrible, but still just not the activity I think you want to see out of a guy who's that late in his career. Makdessi is definitely solid, but I don't really see him having enough of a finishing threat to deter Jamie Mullarkey. I think Mullarkey's kryptonite is the harder hitting guys who can starch him. We saw him get KO'd in his last fight, but that was against a young, really explosive guy in Muhammad something, Ahmedov or something or other, Tajikistani, but we're just not seeing that same KO threat out of Makdessi. I think Mullarkey finds a KO of his own in this fight. Probably just pours the damage on Makdessi and gets him out of there in the second round. Next up is a featherweight fight between Jack Jenkins of Australia, and he is taking on Chepe Mariscal. Jack Jenkins is 3-0 in the UFC, one of those fights being in the Contender Series, and Chepe is 1-0 with his last fight being a win over Trevor Peek. I think Chepe is being underrated with this line here. He really handled business against Trevor Peek. He showed a lot of maturity in that fight. I think he kind of came in with this brawler sort of expectation of him. He's just going to go in there and go buck wild. And while we did see a bit of that, he also showed an ability to be patient and to pick his shots. And I thought it was a pretty impressive performance over a guy who's not the most skilled in Trevor Peek, but super dangerous. Jack Jenkins, on the other hand, 3-0. He knows how to win fights. He's got great kicks, throws really hard kicks to the body, and some great leg kicks. But I don't see those being enough to really deter Chepe here. Definitely wouldn't be shocked if Jack Jenkins just sort of kicks and, fights from a distance and just leg kicks his way to a decision win here. But I think Chepe will be able to make it enough of a dogfight where I would give him a bit of an advantage. And I think he can even find a KO here and shock a lot of people. So Chepe by KO is the pick here. I really like the value we get from him. And topping off our prelims, we have Carlos Ulberg taking on Jung. Carlos Ulberg is the minus 265 favorite in this one. He is 4-1 in his last 5 fights, and he's riding a 3-fight KO streak. Jung, on the other hand, is the 2-1 underdog. He's 2-1 in his last 5, but he's coming off back-to-back losses to Devin Clark and Dustin Jacoby. I've been saying it a while now. If you've been watching, I think Carlos Ulberg is next up. I think he's got what it takes to succeed at a high level and challenge for the belt at 205. We see these strikers have a lot of success, and I think he's already has among the best striking in that 205 division. Good combination of power and technique and accuracy. He comes from a really impressive kickboxing and I think rugby background. I think this is going to be a big moment for him to sort of put his skills to the test and to really show off against Jung, who's a guy who's definitely, he's big, he's strong. I think those are his biggest abilities right there, but he's not as much of a finishing threat as I'd say Kennedy Nzechukwu, who gave Ulberg his sole loss. I think Ulberg gets another KO here, extends that KO streak to 4 fights in a row. Jung, I just don't think really has the goods to deter Ulberg for long. And I think a win here could set up potentially a Dustin Jacoby matchup. I think that would be a really logical next step for Ulberg, taking on a guy who's a natural striker with a lot of ability himself. So Ulberg by KO is going to be the pick here. Kicking off the main card is a light heavyweight fight between Anton Turkalj, I believe you pronounce it, and he's taking on Tyson Pedro. Anton is 1-2 in the UFC, with Tyson Pedro being 2-3. This one's a pick'em. Anton, it's worth mentioning, was basically fed two Brazilian roid monsters in his first two fights in Victor Petrino and Jailton Almeida. Two guys who were able to just lay on him, and in Almeida's case, get a submission. He really just had no answer for the strength of those two guys. That's not really going to be his experience against a guy like Tyson Pedro, who's going to go in there and bang. But Tyson has, on the other hand, has been fighting dudes for a while now, despite only having like less than, I think, 15 fights on his resume. He got into the UFC real early, and he already has names like Shogun Rua, Khalil, OSP, Paul Craig. I mean, he's been fighting guys for a while now. That big fight experience is what's going to give me the edge to Tyson Pedro. I think he finds a decision win in this one versus the Swede. Next up is a heavyweight fight between Justin Tafa and Austen Lane. They are rematching after their first fight ended pretty abruptly by like an eye poke, I think. I picked Austen Lane the first time around. Justin Tafa is going to be the favorite in this one at minus 218. He's 2-2-1 in his last 5, while Austen Lane is coming off of a Dana White Contender Series win where he avenged his initial Contender Series loss to Greg Hardy. But I'm not going to count that Greg Hardy loss against Austen Lane too much. He was really young in his UFC career when that fight happened, and he's got a lot more fights under his belt now. He actually has more fights than Justin Tafa, albeit against not UFC competition. I think Tafa is a little too dependent on the one-punch KO, like sort of walk-off KO win here, whereas Lane is going to have a bit more cardio, and he's going to rely on combinations more. I think Austen Lane is going to find a KO in this one. He's going to frustrate Justin Tafa with his reach here and his height. Tafa is definitely dangerous, so if he touches Austen Lane's chin, I could definitely see Lane going down, but I like the value we're getting from Austen Lane here. And I picked him the first time. I'm not going to go back on my word. Next up is a featherweight fight between Manel Kape and Felipe dos Santos. Weird fight here. Felipe dos Santos is only 22 years old. Manel Kape is 18-6 in his career. He's got a lot of experience, and that's why he's going to be the minus 400 favorite here. He is 3-2 in his last 5 fights, but those 2 losses were to Pantoja and who was the other one too? And Nicolau. So, I mean, he's losing to the best guys at 125. And he is on a 3-fight win streak, so he's got some momentum here. This is just a tough matchup for Felipe dos Santos. I mentioned how young he is, and he only has 7 fights on his resume. I think this is just an insurmountable task for a guy that young against a guy as experienced and dangerous as Kape. I think Kape gets a KO in this fight, setting up a matchup with who did he throw this shit at? It'll come to me. The dude, you know who I'm talking about. Kiefer France. Thank you. Jeez, almost had to re-record the whole video there. Nice recovery. Thank you. All right. Our co-main event is a heavyweight fight between Alexander Volkov and Tai Tuivasa. Volkov is the minus 250 favorite here. He's 3-2 in his last 5 fights. Bam Bam is the plus 205 favorite. He's 3-2 in his last 5 fights. Obviously, Tuivasa's last 2 fights were not great. They were KO losses to Cyril Gane and Sergey Pavlovich. But those are, 2 of the top 4 heavyweights right now? I mean, I think you put Gane, Pavlovich up there with Aspinall and John Jones is the best at 265 right now. Like, without a doubt, just about. So those are excusable. He rushed into the Pavlovich fight after taking a beating versus Cyril Gane. So that Pavlovich fight now is basically a year in the rearview mirror. So he's taken some time to collect himself, get ready for this fight. And I'm taking Tuivasa by KO in this one. I mean, Volkov's got a lot of miles. His wins were against I mean, Alexander Romanov, okay. Jairzinho, I think, was his other win. I mean, yeah, I'm not too impressed with Volkov. I mean, he's a savvy veteran, but I think definitely he's best in that sort of gatekeeper role. Heavyweight is about finishes, who punches harder in my eyes. I mean, I think that's the biggest determining factor, and the edge in power and finishing ability goes to Tuivasa without a doubt. So I love the value we get from Tuivasa here. And then finally, we have our main event. It is Israel Adesanya taking on Sean Strickland for the 185 belt. Sean Strickland, I'll say it right now, I think he could be the most underrated fighter in the UFC. I'll say that without a doubt. Feel free to debate me below. But, I mean, I take him against every 185er not named Robert Whittaker and Dricus du Plessis, pretty much. I mean, he's a guy who he's 8-2 in his middleweight career. Very impressive. One of those losses being a decision loss to Jared Cannonier, which I thought he for sure won. I thought the judge got that one wrong. It looked like he was taking hard punches, but he said it himself. I mean, those punches were landing on his arms the whole time. That's neither here nor there. He has a shot here to shock the world, shock everyone, and beat Israel Adesanya here. I'm giving Sean more of a shot in this fight than I think 99% of MMA fans. Sean, it's a brutal matchup for Sean. I mean, I'll admit it. He's got that plodding style. He's really only throwing hands. He's throwing a jab and he's throwing the cross just about. But, you know, damn it if it isn't effective. He's done it against basically everybody he's faced, not named Alex Pereira. And I think people have a tendency here to say, okay, look what Alex Pereira did to him. Israel's going to do the same thing. But Izzy and Pereira are not the same fighter at all, despite them both being kickboxing guys. I mean, Izzy has a much more counter-striking skill set and tendencies. And I think Izzy's just more of his fights go to decisions than KOs. So I think Izzy's going to find the decision here for sure. It's definitely a positive matchup for him. It's going to be tough for Sean to close the distance here, but I also just don't see him finishing Sean. Izzy was on a 4-fight decision streak before his fights versus Pereira. I think Izzy's definitely a guy who he sort of lets his opponent dictate how he fights the fight. And obviously it works for him. He's had a great deal of success. But in my eyes, he's kind of reliant on his opponent to set the tone. And if his opponent isn't sort of forcing it upon him to get the KO, I don't really see him getting it. So that's why I see him getting a decision win here. Sean, wouldn't surprise me if he gives Izzy a run for his money, frustrates him a little bit. Sean's a psychopath. He's not going to change up his strategy. He's going to be him, which I think he should be. Stick to your guns. But Izzy, I think, is just going to be too much, too long, too skilled, too many different weapons. So Izzy by decision is going to be the pick here. But, I mean, I'm definitely not counting out Strickland. That plus 470 price you're getting for him is definitely tempting. I mean, I'll say this. I give Sean a bigger shot in this one than I gave Yair Rodriguez versus Volk. So take that as you will. I did not give Yair much of a chance in that fight. But a win here. That's going to set up a matchup between Izzy and du Plessis, which I think is really the big money matchup for Izzy in the UFC. That one is it's just a better story. Strickland's a psychopath. I love him for it. Love him and hate him for it. I mean, he's just super polarizing figure. Glad that he's got this opportunity to showcase his skills on a main event of a pay-per-view, like I think he deserves to be doing. But this is going to be a tough one for Sean. So with those are my picks. The sports books are trembling in their boots, boys. Let's give it to them. Have a great weekend. Like and subscribe. Let me know what you think down below. Peace.